Thus, I would like to raise a note of caution that increasing the expectations too high by hoping to resolve Turkey's multiple foundational dilemmas through the writing of a new constitution may be unrealistic in the short run. It may culminate in disappointment. Especially, it may not be wise to pin all hopes on the expectation that the current political actors can agree on writing a thin constitution, meaning a concise, liberal democratic constitution merely stipulating fundamental rights and procedural issues. In fact, this has been argued by many civil society actors that we should replace the current messy, thick constitution with a thin version of constitution, a liberal democratic constitution. And we should not pin too much hopes that such a thin constitution would be a magical solution that can in fact resolve these foundational dilemmas. I don't have the time to elaborate on this, but I think this would not work in the Turkish context for a variety of reasons. Instead, a more incremental political approach might be a better approach. In this perspective, politics and political log rolling would be the key. Take the question of secularism. It involves deficits of religious freedoms as well as deficits of freedom of unbelief. And it has multiple stakeholders such as Sunni Muslims, Alevi Muslims, Sufi religious movements, women, and the secular and religious civil society. The multiple and often conflicting demands and fears of these groups can be reconciled only through political processes and political log rolling. They cannot be resolved merely through the application of liberal universal rights and freedoms and a thin constitution stipulating these rights and freedoms. The result of this alternative incremental approach might be another thick and detailed constitution, albeit a civilian-made one and a more democratic one, whereby each major group in society would receive specific guarantees for their existential fears. Now I would like to say a little more on why cooperation, in the short run, cooperation might be more difficult than many, including myself, hope. The June 2011 elections have not given the ruling AKP party sufficient power to unilaterally change the constitution. But it has also created the prospect, as many have realized, that, that the party might rule the country for years to come, perhaps one more or more terms, comparable to Japan's LDP or Mexico's PRI in the past. We know that such parties, whether they want that or not, become authoritarian over time for internal and external reasons. Internally, the iron law of oligarchy seems to have taken its toll on the party, where power is highly concentrated in the hands of an all-powerful leader and a small inner circle. In fact, the party did not start with this promise and with this type of organization. Externally, the party seems to have forged strong corporate relations of economic and political interest with major business and media groups, part of the bureaucracy, and powerful Islamic movements. The existing constitution, which was intended to protect a strong state and executive against political society, provides ample powers that might be welcomed by a dominant party. Centralized and intrusive institutions such as JÖK, the Directorate of Higher Education, Diyanet, the Directorate of Religious Affairs, and TIP, Information and Communication Technology Authority, which in fact also regulates the internet, for example. An only partially independent judiciary subject to government pressures, and independent media are examples. But there are also very powerful liberal tendencies within the Justice and Development Party. And the administration of the party fully understands that Turkey's continuing economic growth and the party's electoral successes and growing role in the world hinges on remaining a secular democracy and resolving destabilizing problems such as the Turkish conflict. So, what could balance these separate different tendencies within the ruling party? I think two forces could balance the AKP's authoritarian tendencies against its liberal tendencies. One such anchor could be the emergence of an effective and constructive opposition. The main opposition party, Republican People's Party, CHP, has long suffered from internal corruption and ideological inertia. The CHP's new administration, which came to power, I believe, less than a year ago, has tried to reinvent the party with the motto, New CHP. While impressive, these attempts have been too recent and devoid of sufficient support within the party itself. Now, the danger is, in my opinion, that the election results will be interpreted by many to mean that the electorate does not support a new and more social democratic CHP. In fact, I do not know any evidence that would suggest this from election research polls and so on. But if the CHP's reform attempts are interrupted and the party resumes its older ways, then inter-party cooperation will probably become much more difficult. A second force that could, in fact, balance the authoritarian tendencies could be the external actors. Unfortunately, all this is happening at a time when Turkish-EU relations are at a low point and the EU is weakened and turned inward by major economic problems. Europe does not seem to be a model of democracy for Turkey anymore, which is, I think, an important development that which we need to pay more attention to. And when we talk about Turkey's growing role in the Middle East or potential influence in the Middle East, we should also think about the impact of the Middle East on Turkey, because the conception, the ideal the model of democracy that Turkey used to aspire to might be changing at the same time. To conclude, in one sense, Turkey is ready and mature enough to work to create a new and more democratic center. All the constituent groups understand that a new constitution and more democratic political center are necessary and desirable. But it would not be wise to expect that this will be an easy and smooth process. And sometimes crises can be opportunities as well. Speaking of the most recent events that are transpiring in Turkey, that other speakers have alluded to as well. A good start to begin to build trust would be, for example, that the three parties in the parliament cooperate and change the laws that the previous speakers have mentioned as well, the electoral law, to enable Mr. Dicle, the Kurdish politician Hatip Dicle, to assume his position as an MP in the parliament.